Life on the ranch was supposed to be quiet, a place where peace stretched out like the rolling fields and fences that marked the property lines. For the rancher, his land was more than soil and timber. It was history, family, and pride. He had built it with his own hands, maintained it through storms and droughts, and guarded it with the same resolve his ancestors once carried. But peace rarely survives when someone like Karen gets involved. Karen was no ordinary neighbor. She had been elected to the HOA board not for her leadership, but for her ability to inject herself into every problem, real or imagined. Her obsession with control turned into a campaign against anyone who lived outside her vision of order. And when she set her eyes on the ranch, she seemed to believe that rules written for cookie-cutter suburban homes applied just as easily to a sprawling rural property. It started with complaints. She didn't like the height of the fence, the angle of the gate, or even the color of the wood stain. But those were only words, and the rancher ignored them. What could not be ignored, however, was her behavior. Instead of using the paved community road, she began cutting through his ranch entrance, driving straight through his gate as if it were public property. The first time it happened, he chalked it up to entitlement. The second time, he knew it was deliberate. By the fifth, it had become a pattern of harassment. Every time the gate was damaged, it cost money and time to repair. Heavy trucks left ruts in the gravel. Horses spooked at the noise, and the sanctity of his land was disrupted. Karen didn't seem to care. To her, the gate was an obstacle in the way of her shortcut. She viewed the ranch not as private property, but as land she could bend to her will, the same way she twisted HOA rules to harass other neighbors. The rancher tried reason at first. Signs were posted, clear and bold, private property, no trespassing. The gate was reinforced, the hinges strengthened, the lock replaced. Yet, each time, Karen found a way to push through. Sometimes she would drive her SUV straight at the gate with enough force to jolt it open. Other times, she'd tailgate behind delivery trucks and slip inside before it closed. Her defiance wasn't subtle, it was a statement. Word spread quickly among neighbors, many of whom sympathized but were too afraid of Karen's influence to intervene. The HOA board, stacked with her allies, dismissed every complaint as unsubstantiated. It was clear that Karen believed herself untouchable. She assumed that because she held a title on the board, her actions carried immunity. But the rancher knew differently. Out on the land, respect isn't given, it's owned. And when someone tramples on boundaries, the only way to restore order is to set things right. So, he began planning. Late nights were spent sketching designs, not for revenge, but for a trap that would teach Karen the lesson she refused to learn. It would be subtle, effective, and perfectly legal. And when it sprang into action, Karen would never see it coming. The days of her unchecked trespassing were numbered. The rancher's plan wasn't born from anger alone. He knew that in order to stop Karen without giving her more power through legal loopholes or HOA complaints, he needed a solution that was clever, effective, and, most importantly, lawful. He wanted her arrogance to collapse under its own weight. First, he reinforced the gate again, this time with a sturdier frame welded from steel and anchored deep into the posts. It looked the same from the outside, a familiar wooden facade, but beneath it was a strength of iron. The hinges were upgraded to industrial grade, and a heavy-duty latch secured it tighter than before. This time, brute force alone would not open it. Then came the real trick. Just beyond the gate, hidden under a layer of gravel, he installed a set of heavy-duty tire spikes, the kind used in parking lots to stop wrong-way drivers. He positioned them carefully, designed to retract for his own vehicles but rise automatically when someone tried to force their way through. It wasn't dangerous, only destructive in the right way. Tires would shred instantly if someone tried to push through without permission. Satisfied with his work, he stepped back and studied it. To the casual eye, it looked like the same old ranch gate Karen had been barreling through for weeks. To her, it would appear weak and beatable, as it always had. That was the beauty of it. The trap lay not in visibility but in her own arrogance. It didn't take long for her to take the bait. A few days later, late in the afternoon, the sound of her SUV echoed down the road. Neighbors watched from a distance, some holding their breath, already guessing what was about to happen. Karen never slowed down. With the same entitled confidence as before, she drove straight at the gate. But this time, the gate didn't swing open. Instead, Her SUV met resistance, the reinforced structure holding strong. Frustrated, she gunned the engine harder, and in doing so, rolled directly over the hidden tire spikes. A loud hiss cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable thump of air escaping from shredded rubber. One tire went flat, then another. Within seconds, her SUV was crippled, leaning awkwardly as she slammed it into park. Karen stepped out, furious, her voice carrying down the quiet road as she gestured wildly at the gate and her ruined tires. Neighbors peeked from their porches, some covering their mouths to hide their laughter, others quietly cheering. For once, the queen of the HOA had been outplayed on her own stage. She immediately reached for her phone, no doubt calling the authorities. Her assumption was simple. She would claim property damage, accuse the rancher of endangerment, and expect the system to bend in her favor as it always had. What she didn't know was that every step the rancher had taken was carefully documented and completely legal. By the time flashing lights appeared down the road, the rancher was already waiting, paperwork in hand. He had been anticipating this moment, prepared for Karen's predictable outburst. This wasn't just about protecting the gate. It was about exposing Karen's abuse of power for everyone to see. And as the officers stepped out of the patrol car, the stage was set for Karen's downfall. The flashing lights cast a glow over the gravel road, and the quiet ranch was suddenly the center of attention. Neighbors lingered near their porches, pretending to go about chores while secretly watching every move. Karen stood with her arms crossed, seating beside her crippled SUV, its tires sagging flat against the gate. The officers stepped out and assessed the scene. Karen launched into her tirade immediately, pointing at the reinforced gate, waving toward the spikes under her vehicle, and accusing the rancher of sabotage. Her voice carried across the fields, demanding justice, confident that once again her complaints would carry more weight than reason. But the rancher didn't flinch. Calmly, he handed over a thick folder of documents. Inside were permits for the reinforced gate, HOA correspondence ignored by the board, photographs of Karen's repeated trespasses, and proof that the tire spikes were installed legally on private property. The evidence painted a clear picture. This wasn't sabotage. It was self-defense against a pattern of harassment. The officers listened carefully, flipping through the paperwork while Karen's voice grew louder, shriller, more desperate. But instead of siding with her, the tide shifted. The facts were undeniable. Not only had the rancher followed the law to the letter, but Karen had been documented breaking it repeatedly. When the officers informed her that she had trespassed on private property, her smug confidence cracked. When they added that damaging the rancher's gate and ignoring posted signs constituted multiple violations, her face went pale. And when they explained that her vehicle's damage was her own doing, the crowd of neighbors could barely contain their satisfaction. The officers issued citations right there on the spot, fines for trespassing, property damage, and reckless driving. What Karen thought would be her victory turned into a humiliating defeat in front of the very people she had spent years lording her HOA power over. Neighbors who had remained silent out of fear began whispering, then chuckling, and finally applauding as Karen sputtered with disbelief. Her once intimidating authority crumbled in the face of accountability. She had walked into the trap herself, and no amount of shouting could undo the reality that the law was not on her side. The rancher remained composed, standing tall by his gate as the officers wrapped up their work. He didn't celebrate or mock. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. His property was respected again, the line was drawn, and Karen had finally learned what it meant to cross it. As the tow truck arrived to haul her crippled SUV away, Karen's reign of intimidation ended. The very shortcut she thought she owned had turned into the scene of her undoing. And in the following weeks, the HOA that had once shielded her faced pressure from the community to hold her accountable. Her influence waned, her voice softened, and for the first time, peace returned to the neighborhood. For the rancher, it was never about revenge, it was about respect. His land, his rules, and the law on his side. And when Karen ignored all of that, she drove headfirst into a trap of her own making. Do like, subscribe for more.